Hello, and welcome to Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support people going through a relationship breakdown and all the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Lisa Gatchell, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. And today we're joined by Tamsin Caine, a chartered financial planner from Smart Divorce, who specialises in advising people going through a divorce or separation, as we look at how to recognise the signs of economic abuse and what you can do about it. It's really lovely to have you with us today, Tamsin. Thank you so much for joining. Can you perhaps just start by giving us a bit of background about yourself and how you came to work in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, first of all. It's a pleasure to speak to you both. So I guess, how did I come to do this? As most financial advisors, I fell into financial advice, a very long time ago, like nearly 25 years ago. That's horrible.
I don't think about that.
Yeah. Yeah, let's just say a very long time ago. And then I went through my own divorce about 9 years ago now. And whilst going through divorce, thought that the work that we do with our non-divorcing clients would be pretty relevant to people going through divorce. My ex-husband, I'm sure, hope he won't mind me saying, was not the financial person in our relationship, and it struck me how much more difficult he was finding it, having to apply for mortgages, having to sort his pension out, having to sort life insurance out, those sorts of things. So I started very tentatively looking into working with more divorcing clients, started working with a few, and gradually decided that it was a good idea to set up Smart Divorce, which is a trading style under our banner of smart financial planning, and started writing a lot of blogs, launched a podcast, and put a load of social media things out, and started working with more and more people who are going through divorce, particularly the people in the relationship who haven't dealt with the money, to kind of guide them through getting divorced and give them some financial education, some financial literacy, so that when they go into their next chapter, they know how to deal with money and much more confident in that area.
And so we're here today to talk about economic abuse and recognising the signs and dealing with it, and hopefully some sort of fairly practical stuff. We might talk a little bit about the law, but we'll try and keep that to a minimum. So, in your work with people, and predominantly the sort of less financially savvy people by the sound of things, is it something that you see a lot of? Is it pretty common? Is it becoming more common? Maybe you could just talk us through, your experience of clients' experiences of economic abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started working in this area, I'd made it very much the case that I wanted to work with couples who wanted to have an amicable divorce. They didn't want to go racing off to court. They didn't want to have a battle. They wanted to sort everything out nice and amicably and come through without having had a huge battle, so that for the sake of the children, as much as anything, they were keeping the children front and centre of their minds and making decisions based on that. And in my immense naivety, I had a conversation with Karen Kipping, who's a divorce coach and specialises in this area. And I remember saying to her, "Oh, I probably won't come across the sort of people that you work with." Not very long after, I soon realised that that's absolute nonsense. I come across probably 75% of the clients that I work with have suffered some form of financial or economic abuse. Now that figure's probably much higher than the percentage of the general population going through this sort of experience, but yeah, it's something that I come across all the time. And the thing is, with economic and financial abuse, I think that it's an experience that people will have that they don't necessarily become aware of until after they leave. Some do, if they've been through much more abusive relationships, some do. But I think in certain circumstances it becomes a realisation during the divorce process as much as anything.
Can you, so when you're speaking to people, what are the sort of red flags that you see when you start to think, oh, okay, I think there might have been a degree of economic abuse here.
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago there was a lady who said, so there's a form that the solicitors use, that courts use, called the Form E, and while they're completing the Form E they need to disclose their financial arrangements. And a lady a couple of weeks ago said, I have absolutely no idea what savings we've got. I don't know anything about the mortgage. I don't know what our house is worth. I've tried to find out. I've asked my husband and he won't tell me anything. So that's a bit of a red flag. I can't understand why there would be any good reason not to disclose that information. But that's a fairly kind of big smack in the face type of example. There are much more subtle examples, such as we've had clients who've discovered debts that have been taken out in their names, loans, credit cards that have been taken out in their names that they're not aware of, that they don't discover until going through the divorce process, or we've had them discovered when applying for mortgages. So there's you kind of have a look at what your credit file looks like. And obviously you're supposed to disclose all the credit on your credit file. If you don't know about it, it's very difficult to disclose. And then they suddenly find there are debts in their name they weren't aware of. Another big red flag is about spending. So you're questioned about all the spending you do. Anything you buy, the bank it's usually that everything goes through a joint account, for example, and you're questioned on everything you've spent. So, what's this £5.50 from Boots? Why were you spending this money in Marks and Spencer's? What's this? Everything, every line of the bank account is questioned. And quite often that's done whilst your ex is spending insane amounts buying the latest Porsche, or going on golf trips that are costing thousands and thousands, staying in 5-star hotels. So it's that discrepancy as well. There's kind of not one red flag that you go, that's definitely financial abuse. It tends to be layers and layers of different things.
I think what those examples have in common is it's about affecting a person's ability to do things, isn't it? Because in a lot of relationships, there'll be one person, you talked about yourself with your ex-husband, one person takes the lead on the financial stuff, because why would you both do it? And life's busy, and probably the case that naturally one of you is a bit more financially inclined than the other. And that in and of itself isn't necessarily abusive. It's just the way you, and then we get clients who say, oh, I'm really sorry, I don't know what we've got in the Form E, but it's the difference between not knowing and asking and not being told. So the little bit of law here is just the statutory definition is kind of quite helpful. It's very wide, but so Section 1.4 of the Domestic Abuse Act 2021, and that defines economic abuse as any behaviour that has a substantial adverse effect on a party's ability to either acquire, use or maintain money or other property, or obtain goods or services. So you can see how those couple of examples are kind of leading to that way. So Tamsin, when you're working with clients who have gone through that, or maybe just starting to realise that they've gone through that, how does that affect their approach to going through a divorce and a separation if they've had sometimes years and years and years of not having the ability to acquire, use, maintain goods, services, and they don't have that kind of financial autonomy?
Massively. And there are a lot of emotional behaviours that you're going to come across that you'll see in clients who are going through this. A lot of the clients that I come across who are in this position constantly tell me how bad they are with money. Oh, I'm really dreadful with money. I really can't look after money. I'm really bad with it. But that might well be that not that they are actually bad with money, but they've been told that a lot. So that breaks their confidence. It means that they have very little self-worth. They don't feel like they trust themselves. But as a result of that, then they struggle to trust other people as well. They feel, as I say, they feel like they can't manage their finances because they've regularly been told that they can't manage their finances. They don't really understand different areas of money and how it can be used. They don't have the knowledge of financial products and so on. As you said, though, it's really important to differentiate between somebody who has been through economic or financial abuse and somebody who's just in a normal, I don't like the word normal, but I can't think of another word for it, a normal marriage where one person, you work as a team, one person does normally take the lead on the finances, but in those circumstances, there's not usually the level of control, there's not hidden things going on, there's not taking away the capability of spending your own money and having, as you say, autonomy over over your own finances. That's not there. So there is a difference, and I do think it's really important that we don't go, oh well, any relationship where there's one person looking after the money, therefore it's financial or economic abuse, because that's not the case, and you don't want to scaremonger people into thinking, oh well, maybe that's what's going on with my relationship. Maybe, but quite probably it's just how your relationship works.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? There is definitely a degree of often one party kind of does take the lead. I mean, I can only talk from my own personal experience, but my husband hates anything to do with bills, arranging anything. That's not to say he doesn't have full access to it all. He's got the internet banking, he's got everything else, but he'd much rather ask me about it because he knows that I look at it a lot more and budget things a lot more closely. But yeah, it is that degree of.
Also, there's something about lawyers being nerds, because that's how it works.
We love a spreadsheet.
Yeah, of course we do.
Yeah, sorry, we do as well.
I mean, from when you're working with people, what makes it more challenging for them to rebuild their life post-divorce? Because, that's what we're ultimately working to do, isn't it? Whether it's financial or through divorce, is to kind of have that fresh page, if you like, and start again. But if you're rebuilding from a situation where there has been economic abuse, what are the additional challenges that person would be going through that perhaps, again, I don't want to use the word normal, but somebody that's going through a divorce that doesn't involve, there's somebody that's going through a divorce that doesn't involve economic abuse perhaps might not even have to think about?
Yeah, so I think that the first and foremost, the main thing is there's that extra layer of fear. There's always fear in relationships. When a relationship ends, it's like, where am I going to live? What's going to happen to my children? Are they going to be okay? Will they be destroyed by the divorce? Kind of obvious, like, no, they won't. They will be fine. You will have somewhere to live. You will be okay. But the extra layer of fear around, I don't know how to look after money. I don't know how to pay bills. I don't know how to research insurance. I don't feel confident in any of the things that I'm doing. So these are all new things that people who've been in economic and financial abusive relationships, they're going to have to learn a whole load of other things that perhaps they wouldn't in a relationship where this hadn't occurred. And I think the other thing that quite often occurs in these circumstances are that they are made isolated from friends, family, and so on. It's not always the case, but it quite often goes hand in hand, that they've perhaps not been allowed to work. It's that ability to have and manage your own money. So they've not been working, so they don't have colleagues and so on to lean on. They don't necessarily have friends. They might have been isolated from family. So again, there aren't the people that we might lean on to go, if we don't know how to do something, it's like, well, I can't do it, but I'll find someone who can. Actually, they're feeling like very isolated. So, and there's this issue with trust as well. So again, it's like somebody's been breaking them down very, very slowly. And so there's issues with trust. So it's like, well, money is a really big thing, but then who do I trust? Who can I lean on to help me through this?
And particularly, I think if you are someone because it can be quite incremental financial abuse, and it can build and build and build over the course of many years, and there's a real sense of betrayal, and when you realise that, and the person you thought you trusted wasn't there to be trusted, so the trust issues can be huge. when you are speaking to a client, you talked about going through the form and doing the financial disclosure, and someone just not having things. And how do you work with people in that situation? What can you do, and what can be done by those people to start to maybe try and regain a little bit of control? And is there anything they can do to kind of minimise the abuse, or start to kind of flip the narrative a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, some can be helped in that they feel like they're not the only one. So stories of, obviously not naming names, but stories of other people that you've worked with that have been through this situation, that they feel like they're not the only person. There's a lot of feeling embarrassed, as if they should have known better, as if they're the only one who's going through this, that they should have spotted it earlier. That feeling of just feeling humiliated, I guess, is probably the best word to describe it. And I think normalizing it a little bit to tell them stories of other people who've been in that position, who they can see they're not the only one.
Couldn't agree with that more. There's something that I think is a real good signifier to me of a client who's been through this is someone who says, "Oh, you must think I'm stupid." I think that's something that, that stigma, that shame, and of course I don't. Of course I wouldn't. Never. And there's a real embarrassment, even to speak to like a professional. So I'm not someone who knows them socially or anything like that, and who sees this, and then you go into the conversation and say, "Well, no, A, no, I don't, and B, this happens a lot more than you might think," and in relationships where you might not think it. Going back to your conversation that you had with Karen Kipping, friend of the podcast, it happens in all sorts of places, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important, that people don't feel like they're the only one, that they feel that they can talk openly to professionals, and nobody's standing in judgment of them. We might not be going through it right now, but it's perfectly possible for it to happen to any of us. I think, and I guess this is the reason we're doing this podcast on this very subject, is that it's not normalised, that it's not really that well known about. We hear about domestic abuse and kind of the understanding in the general public is that domestic abuse means violence, means, what's going on behind closed doors. You're going to work with a black eye, and of course that's domestic abuse. But I think the economic and financial abuse is far less known about. And I think whilst we try and let people know that it's going on far more often and far more commonly than people really realise, hopefully that will get rid of some of the stigma. But I think there's the other issue in that we just hate talking about money in this country, don't we? You don't discuss money with your friends and family, and because of that, this is even more kind of hidden under the carpet, isn't it? But I think kind of trying to separate people from the experience, it's not about them. It's not something that they've done. It's something that's being done to them. It's not their fault. There's no reason for them to feel guilty or humiliated or embarrassed about it. The important thing is for us to start giving them some. Again, I'm not massively keen on these words either, but it's the best way I can explain it. Give them some financial education so that they start to understand what financial products are, how they work, what they do, how they can use them in the future, how to go around doing things like researching insurance products, etc., so that they start to build some confidence. Talking them back to the for me again feels like massive part of my life at the minute. But looking at future budgeting, looking at how much might you spend on this? Let's start thinking about your expenditure, about what things are really important to you, and sort of build the budget for the future with them, so that they start understanding a bit more about the things that they might have to pay for in the future. Property maintenance, replacing white goods, etc. These things are, because they're not day to day, it's not food, it's not bills. Those sorts of things can often get forgotten by individuals, not obviously not by solicitors, but by individuals. And I think the other thing is to get them some really good legal advice, because that's paramount in these situations, and they're likely to need it, because in financial and economic abuse, they probably don't have a huge amount of access to money themselves to pay for professional help, but they're probably going to need it more than most, I would say.
That probably steps in quite nicely for me to ask Matt what somebody could do. I'm going to put him on the spot, just,
This wasn't briefed in advance, okay?
What somebody could do if they wanted to get legal advice, but they didn't have any access to funds. What are the options?
Yeah, it's really tricky, and it's a bit of a catch-22. There are options. I mean, as a starting point, most family lawyers will do some sort of kind of either freebie call, free half hour, fixed fee initial meeting. So, there is a beg, steal and borrow the money, to do that. I think that the vast majority of family lawyers, and, at Stowe, we would certainly do this if if it was a situation that was very, very clear, obviously at the start, that someone really needed some help and didn't have the funds, and then there are things that can be done. So if you end up kind of able to do that kind of first step and speaking to someone, but you think, well, hang on, I've just been given this cost estimate by my lawyers, and if the cost estimate will be higher because it's economic abuse, frankly, because that's going to be a harder, more challenging case to run because of the personality on the other side. But there are funding options. So there are a couple of options. The first one is you write to the spouse and say, hi, please fund the legal fees. And people love that. Paying for your spouse's divorce lawyer is one of people's favourite ways to spend money. So when that response gets ignored or rejected, there's another couple of options. And there are litigation loan companies who will fund divorce proceedings and financial proceedings, and you can make an application for that, and that will provide some funds that go straight to lawyers to pay the bills, and the money is recovered from settlement at the end. They can come with quite high interest rate charges, sort of credit card levels, but they're very controllable. If there's no access to funds, it's a really good other way to do it. And if you have been put in a position where you've had to take one of those out when your spouse has been holding money that they could have given you, but they just don't want to, there is a bit of case law which suggests that the court should then order that the interest and the charges on that loan are paid by the refusing to pay spouse, which I've been quite successful in running a couple of times. And then the other one is you can apply for a legal services payment order. And that is an order where the court orders your spouse to pay your legal fees. So there's options. And then that often goes hand in hand with a maintenance pending suit application, MPS, or interim maintenance, which is a sum of money that a more financially well-off spouse has to pay to the less financially secure one to meet their ongoing living expenses, whether it's the mortgage, whether it's rent if they've moved out, whether it's being able to put money for the kids and pay the bills and that sort of thing. So there are options. The really tricky thing is that if you are in an abusive relationship, then trying to get that information is difficult because you normally have to pay to get it to pay law firms, because law firms aren't charities. That said, there are some great charities out there who can help with that sort of thing. So, the Citizens of Advice for some basic legal advice, Support Through Court, a really good charity. There's a charity called Surviving Economic Abuse, who are, as the name suggests, the experts in the field. So, that's that. Does that answer the question, Lisa? Is that all right? Did I pass that little test?
Yeah, well done.
Phew. I mean, Tamsin, do you see when you get clients who are kind of speaking to you, is it a similar sort of thing where, because I'm just interested in that, taking the first step to kind of see someone, because if you don't have the finances, you often don't have the money to make the appointment to get the advice to tell you how you can get the help. Is that an obstacle that comes about in you doing the sort of the related financial element to this rather than the legal side?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it is often a case of I was going to say beg, borrow, or steal. Not steal.
Yeah, not steal. No, I think I said that as well. As less of the stealing.
Yeah, less of the stealing. Quite often, I think it's borrowed from family where there's that opportunity. As you've said, litigation funding can be useful for clients to use, but doesn't tend to be able to be used for our financial work that we do with clients. But there are ways and means of working that out. We might be able to take money later or whatever. we can often come to some arrangements. I think, yeah, it's difficult, and I think perhaps because of the information that we put out on social media, we do offer a free initial meeting, which is supposed to be for 15 minutes. I'm not very good at that. So as a result, we do often see people before they see solicitors. So we can quite often, if we spot something like that, kind of recommend a solicitor that we know has this area of expertise, to work with people in financial and economic abuse, so we can guide them to the right kind of person to help them. They tend to need somebody who's quite a gentle, empathetic person on their side. The kind of sort of shiny suited, scary looking lawyers, which neither of you two look are in this category, I should say. But there's this image in and I'm sure it comes from TV and films and so on. If you think of a solicitor or a lawyer, you've got your image, and financial advice is exactly the same. People don't get in touch with a financial planner and expect to see this. They expect a kind of older suited, tie wearing gentleman in a big leather chair and with a library behind them and a big scary desk and all this sort of thing. And I don't think that's particularly, it's not a particularly helpful image, and it's not a particularly helpful idea to think that that's what you're going to go and see. But I think that adds another bit of fear of, actually, this is probably the first time you've spoken to a legal professional or a financial professional, and you need to know that the person who you're going to talk to isn't that. And I think, our social media tends to have us sort of quite out there. So we have people kind of listening to what we think and listening to what we've said in advance. So they sort of know that they're not going to come and see somebody who's properly scary, which I think helps.
When someone is dealing with a potentially scary spouse, and obviously, we talked about the different types of abuse. Something says that they so often go hand in hand, is that there's economic abuse, but there's also coercive control. There might also be violence. There might also be, sexual abuse. It might be all sorts of things. So quite often, dealing with someone who, whether it's one type or multiple types of abuse, is very scary to that person. Them being the scary lawyer / financial advisor who hits that stereotype, who is the sort of, oh, you need a Rottweiler, that sort of approach is often not the right thing. For all that, then your lawyer needs to absolutely stand up for that person against their spouse who is difficult. I mean, Lisa, what's your views on it when you as a lawyer getting someone who's coming into you and you're getting the sense that there's some economic abuse, and maybe it's the first time that they've really kind of spoken to anyone about it. How do you deal with those conversations?
Oh, they're always really tough conversations, and I think this is where I would start to talk to a client about building their team, their support network that's going to be around them. So we've spoken about it, but getting that financial advice, but also perhaps making sure that they've got friends or family members that they can speak to get an emotional support as well. And if they haven't, because perhaps they have been isolated from family and friends, sort of pointing them in the direction of divorce coaches or podcasts, blogs, things where they can start to get some information. Because I think, Tamsin, you're quite right. A lot of this is just deer in headlights at the beginning, and not really knowing and not really understanding what their options are, how they found themselves in this position, and how they're going to be able to move on. And it is just about making sure that they're educated. So it is a case of, from our perspective or my perspective, making sure that they understand what their options are and that they have multiple options, and ultimately they are in control of those options to a certain extent. We might get into a situation where we have to issue proceedings, but that's very much a last resort. There are lots of options, because often they haven't felt in control of what they're doing up until this point. So trying to give them a sense of control back as to how we're going to steer this, making it very clear to them that they are entitled to information. So when we're looking at bank statements and disclosure and, savings accounts that they might say, I don't know, making it very clear that they're not asking for anything that they're not entitled to, because sometimes they feel like perhaps they'll be seen as being nosy, or, well, maybe I shouldn't have that information. So actually, it's making it very clear that this is all stuff they are absolutely entitled to have, and supporting them in then going through all of those documents and trying to set it all out as clearly as possible for them, and giving them time often as well. So they will often need an appointment, and then they might take a couple of weeks, whereas another client may come back in a couple of days. It may take a couple of weeks for everything to really sink in, for them to be able to speak to a financial advisor or speak to a friend, and then they'll come back, and again making it very clear that that's okay as well. They can have the time to properly digest. And I would always make sure as well that the advice I'm giving, if I'm giving specific legal advice, goes in writing afterwards as well, so that they can look back on it. Because often when we're in appointments, we throw a lot of information at people, and it can be quite, I fully appreciate it can be quite overwhelming. We're often trying to pack a lot into quite a small space of time, because it's expensive seeing a lawyer. We know that, but giving them the advice in writing afterwards, if you've gone through something with them that's particularly complicated, or if they've got various different options, backing that up in writing so that they can take that time to consider, and then they can re-look over that advice.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, I think the control point's really interesting, because letting them know that they're in control, that can be quite scary for clients sometimes, can't it? And do you find that, Tamsin, as someone who's not had control and suddenly go, okay, you've got control? The default is sometimes be like, oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, okay, Matthew, whatever you think. Well no, here's my advice, but it's got to be your decision. I mean, is that something that you see from the financial side of things, that kind of fear of taking control?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, all the time. And I think that goes hand in hand also with the ex saying, this is what you can and can't do during this divorce. So they rock up. You see people perhaps who have tried to do this between them, even if they're in this situation, and the ex has rocked up with a perfectly formed spreadsheet with everything on it, and this is how we're going to divide the assets. And it's like, oh, and they feel like...
And don't go and see a lawyer, it's a waste of time and waste of money.
Yeah, don't go and see a lawyer because it's a waste of time. I've got all the spreadsheets here, this is how we should settle it. You're not touching my pensions, which is like red flag to a bull with me. It's like, yeah. No, that's not right. Let's not go down that way. Yeah, don't bother with disclosure. We don't need that. What's all that for? I've told you what there is. It's like, okay, right. I've told you what there is in the form, but I won't give you supporting evidence to back it up. So I've completed the Form E, but I don't really need to give you bank statements or any of the information about it. It's all of these things, because it tends to be, Chinese water torture, drip, 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 a bit at a time. It's not necessarily all flooding in all at one go. And I think, yeah, well, it's your choice is a really difficult thing to say to or for somebody to take on board when they've got you giving them some options and their ex going, these are the only choices you've got. And you must feel like you're being battered from all sides, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really tough process. So, I think that's all been really useful. What we often like to do here is kind of finish our chats with a bit of practical advice. So for anyone who's listened through to the end, it's a bit of a recap then, Tamsin. If someone's listening to this thinking, this is me, or crikey, this might be me, or crikey, this might be my brother or my sister, or whatever, what are your sort of top tips for people to start to deal with facing up to the impact of economic abuse?
Yeah, so I think get as much information as you possibly can. So listen through to, these podcasts are amazing and they're free. You don't have to pay to listen to them. Go back over all of the series when you're out walking, when you're in the car, whatever, and just take on board as much information as you possibly can and start learning about divorce yourself. Get some professional advice. You know, as Matt said before, if you can go and see a solicitor for half an hour and beg or borrow, not the steal bit, some money to get access to some information, some advice for half an hour, at least you'll find out what your options are, where you stand. Same with financial planner. Most financial planners specialise in divorce, and I would recommend that you see somebody who specifically specialises in divorce, because financial planners don't all, and the ones that do are the ones that you need to talk to on this subject. The ones of us that do know about this subject because we deal with it all the time. But yeah, come and speak to us, and if it's at all possible within your budget, try and get some emotional support, as Lisa said before. So either whether it's friends or family, if friends or family either aren't there or they don't feel like the right people, they're giving you advice but it's not quite sitting right with you, then a divorce coach, a therapist, there are loads of people out there who provide emotional support to people going through divorce. And don't accept what your ex tells you is gospel, because it might not be right. So just because they say don't touch my pensions, or just because they say this is the right outcome, this is the right solution, it may not be. And you've got one chance to get this right, and one chance to create the future that you really want from the money that you get from your divorce. And it's really important that you get it right. So speaking to professionals and making sure that you're getting the right advice from them is really, really important.
Thanks, Tamsin. That was all really helpful, and we are really grateful for you joining us today on the podcast. So that's it for this episode of Stow Talks. Thanks for listening. If you are at immediate risk of domestic abuse, please call the police. You can also access help and support from the 24-hour National Domestic Abuse Helpline on 0808 2000 247. For support with economic abuse, please contact the charity Surviving Economic Abuse at survivingeconomicabuse.org. And you can find out more about the work that Tamsin does supporting clients at smartdivorce.co.uk. If you would like more information on our podcasts, head over to stowtalks.co.uk, and please rate, like, share and review this podcast where you can.